Electric wiring. You know, people often get their wires crossed if they wind up using more than 2 wires at a time. And furthermore, many of us are just absolutely terrified of being electrocuted to death. Of course, Hollywood helps promote that idea, but the truth is, as long as you follow proper procedure, as long as you're careful and you have a basic understanding, you can be completely safe with electricity. And of course, in typical construction, you don't work on any wiring or on any box that even has power applied to it, especially if you're new to it. But typically, on the outside, you'll have a meter base and a box, and often for a job site, it'll be set up as a temporary on a pole. And this temporary pole gives power to the job site until the house is completely finished and absolutely ready to go. And it's only then that the power company even hooks wires to it to allow power to come down those wires. So it's just not even possible that you could get shocked while wiring a new house. So this is a very basic little training wall that we use in some of our workshops. You may have seen it a time or two. I want to step you through real quick how it is that you wire a two-way light switch. That is, one light controlled by 2 switches. That way it can be turned off or on either end. So let's get started. Often in the case of a conventional home, you'll have an indoor panel where all your breakers are located. You have one wire that comes in that is your ground lug. It's usually either bare or it's marked with a green wire. It goes to these strips. Occasionally you'll have a municipality that won't allow you to connect the two, but the neutral and grounds typically go to the same bar, and you also have a ground rod that's connected to this same neutral bar that goes 10 feet in the ground. And anyway, so the first thing you typically do when you're wiring is you know where you want to go. And so there's often nothing on the walls. If it were an AirCrete structure, you may have conduit, but you would feed your wires up into the box, make sure that they can reach the breaker. If you're going around, don't ever just go straight across. It's always going to be in the way and making a mess. You would simply bend the wire and put it into place roughly so that it goes where it's supposed to go. And with a little bend on the end, it guarantees that it's not going to get pulled loose through the box while you're pulling on the wire from the other end. And so typically you'll spool this off and feed it down your wall at whatever length that happens to be, and then pull it up into your box. In typical framing construction, of course, you've always got your wires in the middle of the boards because you don't want a nail or screw to get into the wire and short something out and become a problem. But regardless of the length of the wire, you simply pull your wire along, and of course the size of this wire is regulated by code, so you can't hardly go wrong as long as you're building to code. And you just keep pulling these wires down through the wall. And so in this example, we are going to make a home run for this one light circuit, and that means it goes all the way from the point of use and returns all the way back to the box, and it doesn't go to any other circuits. You'll pull this wire in place. If you're doing 2x4, you'll staple this wire, but pull enough in, this is your hot wire. So typically you would go ahead and pull all your wires throughout your structure to know where it is that you want to go. I would recommend that as you pull them back to the breaker box, you label them so that you can actually label your breakers later, something that most electricians don't even do. But at least then you would know where things go. So there's your power wire. So typically, if you're going to be running a two-way light switch, you're going to have a 3-wire with ground, 3 colored wires and 1 ground. These can also be used for ceiling fans with lights. In fact, I would never pull a wire to a ceiling fan without pulling a 3-wire. So this is what goes between your plug boxes. And obviously the length of this could be any length whatsoever. But you pull your wires, bend them over so they don't get pulled out of place while you're moving, and then you feed them through the wall. For the sake of simplicity and staying in the camera frame, I'm just going to pull it across here. And of course, again, if this were done in AirCrete that's cast or other structures, I would most likely have this in conduit. And anyway, so you get this wire pulled between your box, and this is where you're able to shuttle the power back and forth between the switches. The next thing from there is to pull just a regular 14-2 wire from the plug box that's not getting the power, just because it makes it easier. So from the far end and the plug that's opposite of the power supply, you pull your power wire through, and you feed it up into your light fixture box. Now, at this point, once you already know where your wire is, when you start stripping these coatings back, it's really pretty easy to get lost in your wires and you don't know which color's which. So one of the handy things we do, having just pulled this wire that we know goes to the light bulb, we'll take something round, a marker, a pen, a pencil, the back of our pliers, and I like to bend 2 or 3 loops in the wire and leave it there. And this little curly thing is also the symbol for a light bulb on a schematic. So if I come back to this plug later and I look at this, I'll know exactly which wire belongs to the light because it's black and it's got a curl in it. So we'll just go ahead and start on this end. You know, typically a lot of people, you'll see people using pliers to strip wire, and one of the reasons that's not recommended is sometimes in the process of trying to strip a wire, you can cause enough damage to the wire by trying to squeeze and strip the wire that by the time you've moved the wire back and forth a few times, it just breaks in two, and you know, then you've got some mystical malfunction somewhere in your circuit and you don't know where because it's enclosed in a coating. So generally not a good idea to use cutters to strip your wire with. The right tool, of course, is a pair of wire strippers, which is marked for each wire size. A lot less likely that you're going to make a mistake that way. Now, one of the first things to do is to tie the ground wires together and get them out of the way. Some electricians just twist this up. Some inspectors really want to see that you've got a wire nut on there. So typically, I like to just put all the grounds together in a wire nut and use a third piece of ground wire and leave it sticking out to connect to the switch. So whenever you get your light switch, this is I don't know, some people call it a 3-way light switch, but the idea here is that you've got 2 colors of post that are the same. In this case they're brass, and then you got one that's different. In this case it's black. So the one that's different from the other 2 we call the common wire. And what this does inside the switch basically is when you switch it back and forth, it connects this common, or this one that's different, to this one or back to this one and back and forth. So that's all it's doing, is literally taking this wire and flipping it between the posts. It's making connection one way or the other, just so you know how it works. And then of course, connected to the framework, you'll have a green screw, and this is where your ground wire goes. Typically I'll curl these up because I don't like them slipping out. There's nothing more annoying than wiring 100 plugs and switches only to have it slip out for you. So we connect the ground wire goes under the wire nut, goes up to the light. Now for this setup also, we have our common or neutral wire. Let's not call it common, it's neutral. The white wire. Never ever ever apply power to a white wire, because when you're building, you want to always know that the white is neutral. It's never electrified, it's never hot, and you really need to stick to code because it can make life easier later. So we're connecting the 2 white wires together with a wire nut. Get it really good and tight. And this white wire you can now just kind of shove back to the back of the box, get it out of the way. That leaves us with our black wire, our red wire, and our light black wire. That is the black wire that goes to the light. And we'll go ahead and strip all of these. Now, the way this works, on the end that connects to your light, the wire that you've curled, that you've marked as your light wire, it goes to the common connection, or the one of the 3 screws on your switch that's different than the others. And I know there's a hole in the back of these. You can shove the wire in the hole to make a connection. Some areas have no problem with that. Some inspectors absolutely aren't going to accept that. And I really like to curl my wire in the direction that the screw tightens down, and get that wire underneath the screw and make sure that there's just no chance that it's going to come loose in a box, or while you're finagling with stuffing a bunch of wires in the box. So now with our light bulb connection connected to the common, we now connect our remaining red and black wire, and of course they could be any color, but your remaining 2 hot wires to the remaining 2 posts. And it does not matter which is which. You can put the red or the black on either side. It does not matter. Sometimes you have to look at these things like a puzzle and figure out which way you're going with it. I'm just going to go ahead and put the 2 black wires on the same side just because I can, no particular reason. You find too, a lot of times it's helpful when you've created a wire that bends around your screw to give it a squeeze with a pair of pliers and tighten it up where it doesn't come loose. And that makes tightening the screw down nice and easy. And by the way, if you're using an impact driver like I'm using here, set that thing on low, or be very careful not to overdrive your screws, because you'll just ruin these electrical screws and strip them out. So now, with the first of our 2-way light switches wired up, we just kind of work the wires around, press the switch more or less into place where it fits easy without a whole lot of resistance. That way when you tighten the screws down, you're not fighting getting your switch to set straight. You don't want it pushed off to one side or the other. Alright, so that's one of our 2 switches. Alright, now on the other end here, this is the box where the power comes in. Same as before. We connect the ground wires together. I cut off a little piece to tie back to our light switch. And as you see, it's a little bit of a booger sometimes working with so many wires, getting so many things to all line up and stay put. But that's the nature of electrical work. And it is important to make sure that everything is tight and well connected. You don't want anything coming loose, because if electrical connections come loose, they arc. When they arc, they create heat. When there's heat, there could be fire. But give everything a tug every time you make a connection. Make sure that there's no looseness or ability for it to come off. So now, with the ground wire taken care of, we'll just stuff that out of the way. Ground wire connected. Now on this end, we have the red and black coming in from our other wire, and we have our black that's our power wire. On this end, where the power feeds in, your common screw, that is in this case the one that's black, or the one that's different from the other 2 screws on the switch, that's where your hot wire connects. So we tie our power wire that comes from the breaker box onto the common point on the switch. They may or may not be labeled common on the switch itself. It might have a C, or it may not say anything. Most of this stuff coming out of China nowadays doesn't really say anything. So again, we hook up our red and black wire that runs between the switch boxes, and no, it does not matter which one goes on which lug. Of the 2 remaining lugs, either one will work just absolutely fine. So just get your red and black wire snugged up there. Now on your white wire, which is your neutral wire, we're simply passing that through from the breaker box, through this box, through the other box, and up to the light. So we're just going to cut those wires off even. Strip the wire off, and again, we're going to apply an appropriate sized wire nut. I'm using yellow. Yellow works fine. It could be an orange, a little smaller, a little tighter. And that white wire is just tucked away in the back of the box. And then you just kind of finagle it again, push your switch in, get it to where it's fitting well without the wires pushing it too crazy out of the way. Now, back on the breaker box end, we have stripped our wire back. Again, typically you're going to want to take a marker and literally just write on the wire as you pull it into the box so you know exactly what the wire is. Your bare wire is ground or safety ground. Typically I like to put my neutrals on one side and the safety grounds on the other. So that's what I'm going to do. Even though they're tied together with this bar, and the safety ground and the neutral is actually the same thing. Neutral is just the position where there's no voltage. And in the case of some trader houses, some building codes, some cities, they require the separation of the neutral from the ground. But again, we're not going to be too concerned about that right now, because this is the typical wiring in this area. You know, I will mention this too, whenever you're stripping these wires, it's a really good idea to not strip a hot wire back too far, because whenever you're shoving wires around in a box or anywhere else, if you've got a long section of hot wire, that ground wire or neutral wire can get into that and cause a short. Definitely something you want to avoid. Now in the case of most lighting circuits, they're often on a 14 gauge wire, so you want to put that on a 15 amp circuit typically. So we'll put it underneath the terminal lug connection on our 15 amp breaker. Give it tighten down, then give it a little pull, make sure it's good. And that's all there is to pretty much any 110 volt circuit, is the neutral, the ground, then your hot wire. You know, just for explanation's sake, this is 220 volts coming into your box. I typically call it single phase, even though it's actually two phases of electricity. This bar and neutral or ground is 110 volts. This bar to neutral or ground also 110 volts. But between the two is 220 volts. And that's what powers your larger appliances in your house. So, and by the way, if you happen to be working with a live breaker box, then honestly, there's really no point in taking risk. Just turn off the main. That way everything's dead and you can't accidentally get your fingers into something hot. New boxes come with little plastic covers that go over these lugs, so when you turn the main off, it's all but impossible to get your fingers into the electricity. So anyway, after all this is said and done and the power is hooked up on your house, you turn on your main breaker and then you turn on your circuit. In this case, our little 15 amp circuit that goes to our lights. And so that easily we've wired a two-way light switch. That means you can be coming from either end of the room, you can turn the light on. You can turn it off from the other end. On, off, on, off, on. You know, now you might be wondering just how does this work? Well, stay tuned. Right after this quick commercial, I will show you exactly how it works. So if you like this sort of thing, if you would like to learn how to do wiring in a path that's a lot faster than conventional wisdom, conventional teaching, and conventional routes of education, we teach this at our workshop. And the Terlingua Alternative Building School, the Terlingua Rapid Build Cast AirCrete workshop, where we're going to show you everything how to make a house from the ground up to ready to move into in just 14 days. This includes wiring, this includes plumbing, this includes actually designing and building a solar system for less than $2 a watt. And that includes your solar panels, your chargers, your battery management system, and your lithium batteries. Much greater life cycle than lead acid. So Be sure to click the link below down in the description and find out more about that workshop. This year is going to be the last year it'll ever be this cheap, because we're going to be moving into a full-blown alternative building school. Because things like wiring your house, unless you're just living in the woods and on an oil lamp and you're okay with that, most of us are going to have some technology. Most of us are going to need electrical work. Most of us are going to need plumbing. Most of us are going to need to know how to size our air conditioners as well as how to install them. All of this is taught at the Terlingua Alternative Building School, as well as this fall's workshop. So check that out if this resonates with you. If you want to know more, whether you want to build for yourself or you want to build for others, these are great skills to have. Even if you're just going to get hired on with a company, having the skills and the understanding behind all of this to do things in a proper and safe and up the code manner is very important. I mean, just your basic college training to go through the bookwork and get a little certificate, that can easily take 2 years of your life and a couple $3,000. So I believe we can bring a great value to you. So again, click the link below in the description. Find out more if this interests you. Thanks a lot. Okay, now how does the two-way light switch work? Well, basically you've got two wires running directly between the switches, and you've got two commons that can switch up or down and connect to either one of those wires. So what happens is the power comes in the common of this switch and it goes down one of the wires to the other switch. If this connection's open to the light, it stays off. When this switch gets closed, the power is then flipped over to the other wire and it travels through to the other switch, which is also closed, so it goes through to the common and to the light, which is already wired all the way back to your breaker panel to the neutral wire. So if you disrupt this end, it then switches this lamp onto the other wire and it's awaiting this light to switch the power onto the other wire. If on the other hand it's on and you switch this one, then it simply moves the power from the one powering the light to the wire that's going to this switch, and yet isn't actually connected to anything. The circuit is open, it's not connected, there's no light. And that's basically it in a nutshell. You can do two-way, three-way, four-way, five-way, six-way, seven-way. You know, you can put in as many switches as is convenient to be able to turn your light source on or off at that location.